How did that happen? I'm wearing a mask. Here we are. Back to the movies. Back in the movie theater, everybody. I loved it.
2020's Tenet serves as a good reminder that writer-director Chris Nolan is the most valuable Hollywood filmmaker we have today. Because in an industry run by franchises and pre-established IP, Nolan is the only person with enough will and leverage to get a studio to back a $200 million fully original concept blockbuster. And that's what this film is also a very strong showcase of. Concept. We've talked about concept and its importance here many times before, and if you juxtapose Tenet to what we've talked about, you'll quickly find that it pretty much aces all that talk. Like, you know how it's crucial to showcase your concept quickly to make it clear to the audience that what they're watching is something special. Well, or you know how it's also crucial to do things that only your concept allows for, to give the audience an experience that they can get nowhere else. Yeah. But all that said, what this movie also made me finally realize is that there is such a thing as going too strong with your concept. Because even though we have all these incredible moments and sequences serving as incredible showcases of original high-concept filmmaking, there's also a big problem with each and every one of them. The problem that inside they're quite hollow and emotionally void. That's this movie in a nutshell, in fact. Incredible on the outside, but not much of anything on the inside. And it all stems from its mentality of going all in on concept and nothing else, which becomes very evident if you compare it to something like Inception, for example, which is the plan for today, to use Inception to see why Tenet ends up lacking in emotional substance. And look, I know how this comes off. Here we have a movie that gave us something special at a time when others weren't willing to give us anything, and yet here I am about to shine a bad light on it. And to be clear, the point here isn't to say Tenet is bad, because it isn't. I know what the video title is, but that's just a series where I take lessons in a negative aspect. That's it. It's not that there aren't positive lessons to take from Tenet, it's just that the negative ones are way too valuable to just ignore. Maybe this video does make me evil, but if so, then I'm necessary evil. So let's contrast Tenet with Inception and find out how going all in on its concept ultimately ends up leaving it with an empty, emotionally void inside. Here's how high concept can become highly harmful. In Inception, even though the concept of dreams does play a major part in the main plot and our launching pad into it as it should, you'll notice that it isn't our actual motivation for it. Our hero Cobb doesn't go on his journey because of anything relating to the dream technology, but because of something much more personal and emotional, something that makes us care about that journey.
When are you coming home, Dad?
Well, I can't, sweetheart, I can't. It's not for a while, remember?
Why?
Hey, Mr. Cobb! How would you like to go home?
And when you take Cobb going on his dream heist to be reunited with his children and compare it to Tenet, you're gonna find something very different. Basically, the gist here is that our main hero, protagonist, finds out that in the future the human race has figured out how to invert weapons, which are now trickling back in time to us.
We think it's a type of inverse radiation triggered by nuclear fission.
You didn't make it.
We don't know how yet.
And Pro's mission then becomes to find out more about those weapons and where they're coming from, because that technology could be very dangerous.
I see no reason they couldn't invert pretty much anything. Even a nuclear weapon can only affect our future. An inverted weapon might be able to affect our past.
But the issue with this is that at this point, the movie has given us absolutely no emotional reason to investigate the inversion technology. We did see those inverted weapons or bullets being used at the beginning as they should, but not in any real meaningful way. It's not like the inverted weapons caused any serious destructive harm. It's not like they killed someone close to Pro that he cares about. Nothing that would clearly establish them as something personal and emotionally loaded that we really see seriously need and demand to go after. Instead, we just get this quick, tiny positive glimpse that can be simply shrugged off later on.
I've seen this type of ammunition before.
In the field?
I was almost hit.
And so essentially we go on our journey of investigating the inverted weapons just because they're inverted weapons and we gotta find out more about them, cause why wouldn't we? As in, we dive into the concept purely based on the fact that the concept exists. And the harmful side to this is that no matter how cool and exciting that concept journey gets, it's now always plagued with the emotionally void question of why though?
I'm not saying Armageddon here.
We have this India sequence where we need to infiltrate an arms dealer's home to find out where the inverted bullets are made, which is so visually incredible and also tied to the theme of inversion. But it's like, why though? Why do we need to find out where the bullets are made? We have this airport sequence where we need to break into this high security storage to find a box of inverted bullets, which involves crashing a real 747 and a simply astonishing inverted fight scene that we eventually get to see from both sides. But why though? What's the big deal in finding that box of inverted bullets? Is it really worth all this absolute madness? We have this highway heist sequence where we need to steal a time inversion MacGuffin, which looks so cool and badass it could fit in any great Mission Impossible movie. But again, I genuinely do not know why we're doing it or what we're even after, because none of that has ever been established to be important to our hero or us. And just imagine how much more powerful all this had been if it was built not purely on the concept but instead on character-driven emotion like in Inception. Imagine this movie began with inverted weapons suddenly showing up at the opera to cause massive destruction to show how dangerous they are. Imagine they killed Pro's brother or closest friend or something to give him and us a strong personal motivation to solve that time inversion mystery and catch whoever is responsible. You know, we'd still get these amazing concept-driven events and sequences, but we'd get them in a way that we can actually strongly care. In Inception, the concept of dreams itself is also made to feel big and meaningful, because even though in that world dream reality is already a norm, it's still introduced to us not only in a grand, astonishing way, but also with new people that can react to it with feelings of astonishment and marvel and fear and so on and so on. Feelings which then, through those reactions, transfer over to us. In Tenet though, it's very much the opposite. For example, here the concept of time inversion isn't yet a norm that our main hero Pro knows about, and so you'd expect his introduction to it to then be something that is meaningful to both him and therefore us. But that's not really the case. The first time Pro comes across time inversion at the beginning, he doesn't really pay much attention to it at all. But to be fair, it is in the heat of a chaotic gunfight, so totally understandable. So again, his real introduction to time inversion comes in the exposition sequence with the scientists. And keeping in mind what you just saw in Inception's exposition sequence, watch how all this plays out. How meaningfully the concept is introduced, what emotionally compelling feelings Pro reacts with.
How? How can it move before I touch it? Cause comes before effect. Well, what about free will? Instinct. Got it.
Yeah, this normal real-life dude finds out that frickin' time inversion exists, and yet the emotional reaction he expresses is about on the level of young Filmento when he dies in Call of Duty.
How?
He doesn't marvel or admire, he doesn't act shocked or astonished, he's just like, okay. And then replies with these scientifically accurate questions that the script needs to answer for us, which isn't helped by the fact that this exposition is delivered in the safety of a boring lab, or that the scientist herself seems as interested in all this as if after this she has to go and explain to the Avengers how the Infinity Stones work. And the issue with this is that if you introduce your concept in a mundane way with mundane reactions, mundane is exactly exactly what the audience will think of the concept as. If Pro doesn't really care, why would we really care? And so there's this weird result where we have this incredibly strong special concept that ultimately ends up feeling about as special as a loaf of bread. And I know that's just the first level of it, but the same mentality applies throughout the movie. You know how in Inception, whenever we find out new big information like Fisher having subconscious security or us dropping into limbo if we die, the characters always sell that bigness with their reactions.
This was your responsibility! You were meant to check Fisher's background thoroughly! We are not prepared for this!
So what happens when we die?
We drop him in limbo. Are you serious? Limbo?
Well, in Tenet, every time there's new big turns or information or character appearances, it's always taken as this face value no big deal. You know, Pro goes to look for a box of inverted bullets and ends up fighting an inverted human being that hasn't yet been established as possible, which then leads to his reaction being,
I thought we'd find a drawing in a couple boxes of bullets.
I'm as surprised as I was.
there's this running threat of this time inversion stuff being so secret that everybody who knows about it is killed off.
No one who's seen this leaves the field. If you don't have the authority, then talk to whoever's in charge of loose ends. That she and her son will be safe.
Implications of this.
Beyond secret. And when we're done, they'll kill you.
When you have to do that anyway.
But then the movie never establishes that as a real threat we need to really be cautious of, but instead just makes it into this running joke that every character is in on.
Well, I've seen too much.
There's this whole squad of time inversion expert soldiers that suddenly just show up out of nowhere. And instead of Pro ever really growing increasingly suspicious of who they are or where they come from or whether or not they can be trusted, he's immediately just like,
let's go.
Followed by the soldiers then giving us more mundane exposition in more mundane tones because somehow all this is just another day at the office for them as well.
This was not a part of the plan, guys!
We don't have time.
Don't you
Particles come into contact.
do that.
Altogether, Tenet is in this weird middle ground where nobody knows enough about the concept to clearly establish why it's so important, and yet everybody still knows enough about the concept to make it seem like it's not really that important, which isn't very emotionally compelling. I know this movie carries the mentality of feeling versus understanding.
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
But the thing is, that doesn't work if we don't understand what it is we need to feel. And that's why introductions are so crucial, why character reactions are so crucial. If you have a concept you want the audience to feel is a big deal, then you have to show us it's a big deal. Finally, even though the concept in Inception does ramp up in scale and intensity the further we go, as it should, the very end of the movie still comes down to something much more intimate and personal character-wise. The emotional core of Cobb finally facing off with the ghostly memory of his dead wife and growing to the point of being able to leave her behind.
I miss you more than I can bear, but we had our time together. I have to let you go.
In Tenet, the concept does ramp up the further we go as well, but then it just keeps ramping and ramping. Basically, we find out that the main villain has gotten his hands on this nuclear time inversion bomb from a dying future that he now plans to use to eradicate the past to save that future.
His death activates the algorithm. He dies, the world ends.
As in, we have your usual verbal blockbuster stakes of saving the whole world. And how this plays out in practice is as this massive war between two opposing armies going forwards and backwards in time.
There's a turnstile. Expect a bitemporal response.
They'll have inverse ordnance.
Inverse, conventional, forward antagonist, inverted antagonist, they have it all.
So what I want to convey is this. Whereas in Inception the climax takes place in Cobb and his wife's home where their relationship first fell apart and what this whole movie circles around, here we go into this random wasteland that we have zero emotional connection to. Whereas in Inception Cobb is trying to fix a failed mission so that he can go be with his kids, here we're trying to stop a world-ending bomb that we've only ever talked about. Whereas in Inception we face off against the person that's been been our biggest mental and physical obstacle this entire time, here we don't even face off against the villain at all, but instead just briefly communicate with him through a radio for some reason. Altogether, what I'm getting at is that the finale of Tenet is all concept and chaos that feels like nothing. Look, I know Nolan's point was to showcase a huge chaotic time-bending war, and yeah, he did it. It looks awesome. And if this was the midpoint, that'd be great. But it's not the midpoint, it's the end, and at the end, looks isn't what matters. Looks isn't what the audience ultimately takes with them. Not to get too harsh, but I took more from the climax of Transformers 4, because that was at least partially intimately emotional.
Get out of here! I gave you an order!
Here, we're fighting in a place we've never been to reach a goal we've never seen against an army of faceless antagonists that we don't know or even really see either, cause most of the action is us just running and firing off screen or at ruined buildings. You can argue that the emotion of the finale comes from the villain's wife finally killing him, or from the very last minute where we finally realize what's gonna happen to Neo, and that's fair. I just think that if you have a primary hero named protagonist, maybe some of that emotion should come through him as well, for more than just a minute.
In Inception, for example, our resolutionary emotion wasn't tied to just one secondary character, but that was more of an added bonus.
But altogether, this finale sequence is the thing that confused me the most, because I was sure that we were gonna end this movie where it first began, at the opera sequence. Now we would have had a familiar location, familiar situation, familiar players, familiarity that carries an emotional connection. Like say that Pro actually did lose someone close to him at the beginning, and so now the finale would be all about him getting a second chance to save that person. As in, we wouldn't just be saving the entire world from a verbal threat, but also a person we know and have felt the pain of losing. Not just pure loud concept, but more intimate character as well. But then again, I'm not Chris Nolan, so I don't know. All I'm saying is, no matter how great your concept, don't let that concept grow too strong and chaotic, especially at the end. Because chaos is the death of emotion. And death of emotion is, well, in some ways, Tenet.